How medieval peasants survived brutal winter Sayu, wake to the slow creak of timber above you, and the low moan of wind pressing through the chinks of an ancient, timber-framed cottage. It's not yet light, though the faint glow of snow reflects against the walls, casting everything in a sickly gray-blue hue. You are lying on a straw-stuffed sack, sharing the stale warmth of the hearth with others your kin. A few chickens, and the musky scent of something damp and fungal. It's winter in 14th century England, and the brutal season has just begun. The peasants' battle with winter never really ended, it only paused during the meager warmth of spring and summer, which were themselves full of back-breaking labor. To prepare for this moment, surviving the cold was not a matter of comfort, but of calculation. Every decision, from what to plant in June to how much fat to save in October, would determine whether you survive February. The roof above you is thatch layers of straw, laboriously layered to repel rain and retain heat. It leaks anyway. The loft above is not a bedroom, but a hay store, stuffed with anything that might provide insulation. It's warmest up there, if you can tolerate the mildew. Down here, by the hearth, is where daily life grinds on. Most of your family sleeps in the same room they cook and eat in, the livestock crowding close at night. The cow's body heat, surprisingly effective, is part of the home's heating plan. There is no chimney. Smoke from the fire gathers in the rafters, escaping slowly through a hole in the roof or through the eaves. Your eyes sting constantly. Your lungs feel heavy. But this is normal. The smoke, you are told, keeps pests away, cures the hanging meat, and strengthens the beams. It is a blessing disguised as a burden. Outside, the land is frozen stiff. The fields are useless now. Whatever crops you harvested months ago, turnips, barley, onions, have been carefully packed into cellars or buried underground to prevent freezing. The root cellar is dug deep and reinforced with timber. Its temperature just high enough to keep vegetables from rotting. It is not well stocked. This year's harvest was modest, and rats have already claimed their share. There's no firewood to spare. Gathering wood is a regulated right, and you don't own the forest. You've spent weeks collecting branches, cutting turf, and drying dung for fuel. Dung, when dried, burns slowly, giving off a greasy, unpleasant smoke. Still, it provides heat, and that's enough. Each day begins early. With less daylight, everything must be done quickly. The fire must be kept alive at all times, as restarting it with flint and tinder can take over an hour in freezing air. Ashes are stirred each morning. Embers coaxed back into flames with bundles of straw or rushes dipped in lard. The fire is not for cooking elaborate meals. It warms gruel, stews water, and sometimes bakes hard, dense loaves of rye bread. Your meals are predictable, bleak, and repetitive. Pottage, an ever-simmering stew of grains, water, and whatever scraps are available dominates. The winter table. It might contain some dried peas, onions, and occasionally a shard of salted pork, if you're lucky. Most of the meat was smoked or cured in autumn. A single pig slaughtered in November must last until spring. Clothing is another defense against the cold, but you own little. Wool is the material of choice. Scratchy, heavy, and, if well woven, relatively warm even when wet. Undergarments are made of linen, if you're fortunate, and layers are the key. Cloaks, if you own one, are reused year after year, patched and ray-stitched until they fall apart. Shoes are leather, but they soak through easily. Feet stay wet for weeks. Chilblains are a seasonal inevitability. You rarely bathe in winter. Water is too precious to waste, and you aren't eager to strip in the cold anyway. Personal hygiene is limited to scraping, brushing, and the occasional rinse of hands and face with icy well water. The idea of bathing every day would seem absurd to you. Your ancestors didn't, and neither will you. The village itself has taken on a hushed quality, snow-deadened sound, and few venture outside unless absolutely necessary. Winter is the season of isolation and survival. The only light after sundown is from tallow candles made from animal fat or the firelight itself. Candles are expensive to make, and the smell is revolting, so most do without. Evenings are spent close together, wrapped in every available blanket, telling stories or mending tools. Silence often wins. Church bells still ring, though muffled by the snow, and religious obligations do not stop for the weather. You attend Mass when the roads allow. The priest speaks of sacrifice and endurance. Saints are invoked, especially those associated with hunger and cold: St. Bridget, St. Nicholas, and even local legends known only in your region. Prayer is a form of insulation, too. And then there are the real threats. Disease, always present, worsens in the cold. Respiratory infections spread in tight quarters. Frostbite takes fingers and toes before you notice they've gone numb. Food stores mold silently in their sacks. And always, there's the gnawing fear. Will it be enough? Did you store enough food? Did you dry enough dung? Did you seal the roof well enough? You listen to the wind pushing against the boards. Somewhere, an animal shifts. The fire cracks faintly. Outside, the snow continues to fall. Surviving winter as a medieval peasant wasn't about one grand decision, it was about dozens of tiny ones made throughout the year. Each moment was a calculation, each task a defense against freezing or starving. Yet people endured, year after year. Not all, but enough to carry their villages and their stories through the centuries. And still, you might wonder if this is just the beginning of winter. What happens when February finally comes? It is now February, the cruelest of the months. The frost is no longer a novelty. It no longer sparkles, no longer charms. It bites. The snow has gone gray, compressed by carts and feet, and refrozen into a hard, sullen crust. The hearth still glows each morning, but the firewood pile has shrunk to an alarming few sticks. Even the dry dung stores are low. Some days you burn straw meant for animal bedding, or, when truly desperate, the thatch from the unused corner of the roof. Hunger is no longer occasional. It is a daily companion. The cellar shelves are nearly bare. The onions have all sprouted or rotted, and the turnips are soft and bruised. You've begun rationing meals with a strictness that would seem cruel in any other season. A bowl of pottage now stretches across meals. The occasional bone once simmered to flavor a stew is boiled again and again, until nothing remains but soft, gristly marrow. And still, the body needs warmth. Children cry more now. Their shoes are disintegrating, their fingers swollen and red. You wrap their feet in rags, stuff their sleeves with hay, and try not to look at the slow swelling of their bellies, a sign that they are eating too little, or that what they do eat has no substance. Adults fare slightly better, but not by much. Labor must continue, animals still need tending, fences still need mending, and food must still somehow appear. But where does it come from? You've learned to forage even in winter. Brambles near the forest edge might still hold dried berries. Nettles, sharp and defensive, sometimes grow near warmer corners of the thatch, and can be boiled into a bitter soup. Tree bark, when stripped and soaked, can be ground into a sort of flour. Some villagers boil lichen, though the taste is unbearable. Hunting is a privilege of the nobility. Peasants who poach risk punishment or worse. Still, a few dare to snare rabbits or birds in secret, setting traps under brush or near hedgerows. When successful, the catch is shared in hushed gratitude, but always quietly, for fear of being reported to the reeve. Then there are the animals. The family pig, if not already slaughtered in November, is eyed daily. The hens, no longer laying in the cold, are sometimes eaten out of necessity. But this is dangerous livestock or wealth, and their loss is permanent. Killing one now is a final decision. If it dies, you will not have eggs or milk come spring. It is a slow barter with your own future. You pass many days indoors, trying not to move more than needed. Energy must be preserved. The cold settles into the bones and never leaves. When you venture out to fetch water, to check on the animals, you wrap yourself in everything you own. You walk slower, knowing one fall could lead to injury, and one injury could lead to death. And the cold is only half the problem. This time of year is known to many as the starving time. Crop stores from last year are all but gone, and the new planting season is still weeks away. The soil is rock hard. There is nothing to pull from it. You wait each day longer than the last, for the earth to soften dot in this fragile stretch of winter. Many die not with drama, but with silence. Old women simply don't wake up. Children cough themselves into fevers and never recover. A man who ventured to another village to barter for beans does not return. You attend no funerals. There is no time. The ground is frozen too hard to dig. Those who remain grow leaner, sharper. Conversation becomes rare. Each person's mind is wrapped around one idea: how to last until the thaw. You have lived too long inside your home now. Cabin fever, though unnamed, is real. Tempers shorten. Accusations emerge. Someone stole grain. Someone took too much salt. The community pulls together. But always on the edge of fracture, you lean heavily on the church. In February, Lenten fasts begin. Not that they change much. You were already eating less than was allowed. Still, fasting becomes a pious explanation for hunger. The priest tells you that the suffering has meaning. You nod, half listening, trying to make your lips form a prayer that your stomach growls too loud. And yet, not all is bleak. There are rituals of endurance. Candlemas has come and gone, the feast that marks the halfway point between winter and spring. On that day, candles are blessed, and light is carried through homes to banish the long darkness. You lit your last good candle that night, watching the flame flicker against cracked walls and praying it was a sign that warmth would return. Even during famine, the human spirit insists on moments of meaning. Stories are told of winters worse than this one, of ancestors who endured. You hear tales of saints who survived on nothing but snow and holy herbs, of peasants saved by the appearance of a deer on their doorstep. You do not believe most of them, but you listen anyway. Children are told not to whistle, lest they summon frost demons. Boots are turned upside down near the fire to confuse the cold. You place iron tools across thresholds, hoping it wards off illness. Rational or not, these habits become rituals, and rituals become the rhythm of endurance. Then, one morning, the snow begins to melt. It doesn't vanish all at once, of course. It softens. The icy grip on the village loosens slightly. You notice the first drip from the eaves, the wet patch in the barn floor. Mud reappears. The sun does not bring warmth yet, but it brings the possibility of warmth. It is enough. Now, the planting begins. As you stare at the slowly thawing fields, you must consider what to plant and when. You must repair your tools, rebuild your fences, and walk the boundary of your land. But you are weaker now. Your clothes are thinner, your belly flatter, your body less forgiving. Spring demands action, but you are tired, and so a question lingers. If the thaw comes too slowly, or the planting fails again, how many more winters like this can one village truly survive? The thaw does not arrive with celebration. It limps in, pale and wet and indecisive. There are days in March when the wind still bites like a January curse, and mornings when frost clings to your boots, but the light lingers a little longer each evening, and somewhere beneath the mess of mud and thawing snow, the earth begins to breathe again. Not warm yet, but alive. You step outside more often now. The smell of wet hay and melting dung fills the air. The hens begin to lay again reluctantly, irregularly, but it's a start. The cow, which somehow survived on last year's sparse hay, is sluggish but intact. Her milk is thin and gray at first. It will fatten like everything else. If the grass grows in time, your feet sink into mud with each step. The fields are ugly, ruined by ice, scratched with hoof marks, full of debris and brittle stalks from last year's harvest. You survey them like a general assessing a battlefield. There's no time to rest. The cold took energy. Now the earth demands the rest of you. You begin the season with a mix of desperation and strategy. Every decision you make in spring is a wager. You have saved just enough seed grain to plant barley, rye, oats, and you pray the rats haven't touched it. If the weather stays mild, the seeds will sprout and yield food by late summer. If frost returns, or the rains come to hard, or mildew sets in, the cycle of starvation begins anew. Tools are sharpened, hoes, spades, wooden plows, all repaired with whatever was available. During winter, twine, animal sinew, scraps of iron. The blacksmith has his busiest month now. You trade anything you can milk, eggs, even a future portion of harvest for a new iron tip or a better handle. You cannot afford a broken plow when time is everything. You work the fields with a kind of religious focus each furrow represents. More than food, it represents time. The earlier you plant, the better your odds. Children carry water to soften the hardest parts of the ground. Women scatter seed and press it gently into the soil. You move in rhythm, half prayer, half labor. The priest blesses the land, and you hope the saints are listening this year. Even with the snow mostly gone, the cold lingers in your bones. Many in the village or illcoffs have turned chronic, and a few old men still limp from chilblains or infections that never healed. But the human body, remarkable in its adaptability, begins to rebound. With the first sips of fresh milk, the first green sprigs of nettle and dockweed, something changes in your blood. The children run again, their faces muddy, their voices loud. You scold them half-heartedly while hiding your relief. A quiet child in winter is a worry. A loud child in spring is a blessing. Around this time, debts are tallied. Lord and manor must be paid. If you borrowed seed, you owe more than what you return. If you rented land, your dues are collected often in labor. You spend days repairing the Lord's fences or digging ditches that don't serve your needs. Still, you comply. Survival is not just about avoiding death, it's about navigating power. The rhythms of spring are familiar now. The fire still burns, but only in the morning and evening. You keep the door open in daylight. Chickens wander freely again. The smell of rot is replaced by damp earth and blooming buds. The world looks poor, but possible. There are things to rebuild. Fences blown over in January must be restaked. The roof must be patched. Where you pull the thatch for firewood, shoes must be re-stitched. The spinning wheel creaks back to life, and women once again twist wool into thread. Hands are rough, but steady. You even find moments for celebration. May Day approaches, you'll dance, half from tradition and half from relief. The village gathers flowers, not many, but enough to make garlands. A pole is erected. It's not joyous in the way modern people understand joy, but it's what you have, a ritual to remind you that the worst has passed. Still, it's not over. The hunger never fully lifts. It lingers like a bruise. Many still eat less than they need. It will be months before the gardens bear fruit or the fields yield grain. But there is forward motion. The hens lay. The cow produces. The firewood is no longer rationed, and you no longer dream of warmth. You have it, at least part of the day. The elderly speak of winters past, the one where 3 infants died in a week, the one where the well froze solid. This year wasn't that, but it was close. And then comes the curious moment, quiet and unnoticed, when the suffering becomes a memory. Instead of a threat, you don't mark it. You just notice the bread is thicker one day. The pottage tastes a bit more savory. Someone jokes during supper. Still, the scars of winter are written across the season. In the empty cottage down the lane, in the hollow cheeks of the youngest child, in the way you now count your sacks of grain more often than necessary. And in your mind, one lingering thought remains. Will next winter be worse? Or will you finally be ready for it? What it was really like to be a medieval servant, you awakened before light. Not to the soft chime of an alarm clock, but to the rough clang of a handbell shaken in the dark corridor by the steward. It's not a pleasant sound. It's not meant to be. The day has begun, and for a servant, the day belongs to someone else. Your feet touch cold stone. The floor is still damp from last night's frost. There's no fire in your chamber. If you even have a chamber, more likely, you sleep in the corner of the kitchen or on a pallet in the scullery. The air smells of smoke and wet wool, and somewhere above you, Rats scurry through the beams. There is no time to stretch or yawn. You dress in silence. In the same old tunic and apron you wore yesterday and the day before. You might change them. On Sunday, if permitted, your shoes are wooden-soled and stiff. They hurt your arches, but they protect your feet from the floor's chill and the kitchen's wet straw. You do not eat yet. That comes later if there's time. First, you must light the fires. All of them. You and the other lower servants fan out across the manor house to the main hall, the chambers, the buttery, the larder, the bakehouse. Flint, steel, and kindling are your tools. Fire that doesn't catch will delay the cook, and a delayed cook means a delayed breakfast, and a delayed breakfast means a very bad day. The fires must not only be lit, they must be clean. You clear the ashes from last night, carry out soot in iron buckets, and lay new logs in tidy crisscrosses. You blow, slowly and carefully, through chapped lips, your breath mingling with the smoke. The fire sputters, hisses, then takes. You move on. There are still 12 hearths left to tend out by the time the sun rises. The manor is stirring. The Lord's children are waking. The nursemaids are brushing their hair. The steward has begun inspecting your work, and the housekeeper is already muttering that the tapestries in the guest hall are dusty. Your next task is breakfast, not for yourself, but for everyone else. The kitchen is always a furnace. In summer, it's unbearable. In winter, it's oddly comforting. This early, though, the oven isn't fully hot. You stoke it again, while the cook higher in rank than you, and fully aware of it, barks orders about trenchers and porridge. You grind barley with a hand quern, your arms aching from the effort, and strain note that smells just this side of fresh. Breakfast is served in shifts. First the Lord and his family, with their spiced wines and warmed breads. Then the household, knights, stewards, and senior servants, those who wear better wool, and sometimes even leather gloves. You are near the bottom. You will eat only after everyone else is done and the scraps have been cleared. When you finally do eat, it is simple. Yesterday's pottage, barley bread, and if you're lucky, a piece of dried apple or a curl of cheese. You eat quickly, often standing, while scrubbing yesterday's trenchers to be reused. There are no forks, only spoons, fingers, and a worn cloth to wipe them on. Conversation is minimal. There is too much left to do. Your rank determines your tasks. If you are a scullion, you scrub dishes, carry firewood, and clean chamber pots. If you are a laundress, you boil sheets and gowns in cauldrons, your hands red from lye. If you are a page, you stand silently in the hall, watching for your lord to signal for wine. Your eyes trained not to wander, even when the guests are laughing. And then there are those who serve upstairs. The chambermaids sweep and air out the rooms, turn the mattresses, and polish the brass. They wash the Lord's feet, yes, with their hands, and replace the rushes that cover the floor, now stained with last week's spills and this morning's soot. The rushes smell faintly of lavender. If you're in a wealthier household, more often, they just smell of mildew and meat fat. There is no privacy for servants. You are always seen, yet never truly noticed. You are there to anticipate, not to be. If the Lord drops his glove, you fetch it. If a guest vomits in the hallway, you clean it. If a candle burns low, you replace it. And if you ever forget your place, even for a moment, the reprimand is swift. Yet, strange as it may seem, this is security. You have a roof. You are not a peasant sleeping in a drafty hut, praying your barley stores last the winter. You eat daily. You are clothed, even if plainly. You are not expected to make your own way in the world, but to support someone else's. And there is opportunity, if barely. Some servants rise. A clever steward might earn land. A lady's maid might marry a merchant. But these are the exceptions. Most serve until they are no longer strong enough, and then they are sent away with a few coins, or a pair of used shoes, or nothing at all. The hours pass quickly, not because they are easy, but because they are full. Lunch must be prepared. The rooms must be cleaned again. Bread must be baked. Linens must be beaten, chickens must be plucked, salt barrels checked, torches dipped, boots polished, parchment warmed near the fire to avoid cracking when written upon. The pace is relentless. Evening brings no relief. Supper is served by torchlight. Wine must be decanted. Guests may appear unannounced, and the entire house must adjust bedding made ready, fresh sheets spread, meat spiced, new logs brought in. You never know when the Lord's brother, or a bishop, or even the local reeve will arrive at the door, trailing servants of his own. And when it is finally done, when the last goblet is cleared, and the last log smolders in the hall, you clean. Again, you reset everything. The hall must be swept, the chamber pots emptied, the kitchen knives washed and oiled, the animals in the yard checked, the locks bolted. Only then do you sleep, sometimes too exhausted to remove your shoes, sometimes too cold to fall asleep at all. And even then, your rest is fragile, for at any moment, a bell may ring, a child sick with fever, a rat seen in the buttery, a guest coughing and needing more blankets. You rise and obey. That is your role still. You ask yourself sometimes, in the quiet of your own thoughts, why such a life so full of labor was willingly chosen. And then you remember, what was the alternative? Was life as a servant better than life as a peasant? Or just another form of quiet endurance dressed up in livery? It is not enough to simply work as a servant in a medieval household. One must also learn how to be a servant, how to move, speak, wait, and remain invisible while being constantly observed. The day continues beyond duties. You must navigate a web of unspoken rules that govern the hierarchy within the household. It's not just between you and your master, it's between you and every other servant, every guard, every groom, every cook's assistant with a chipped tooth and a memory for slights. The structure is rigid, even within the servant class itself. The chamberlain is near the top, often overseeing not just the bedrooms, but the entire flow of the household. Beneath him, the steward watches over finances, provisioning, and sometimes the servants themselves. The housekeeper, if present, is a power unto herself, feared by laundry girls and footmen alike. Below them lie ranks you might never even learn unless you were born into them. Pander, keeper of the bread; butler, keeper of the wine; Spencer, in charge of pantry supplies; and the cook, whose mood can make or break your week. And far beneath that, you, a boy who polishes boots, a girl who peels onions until her fingers blister, someone who wakes up to heat water for people who don't know your name. There is protocol in everything. When to speak, how to bow, how deep the bow should be depending on who is in the room, where to stand during a meal, how many paces behind your master you should walk, what colors you are allowed to wear, if any, whether you can sit in a hallway chair or must remain standing. And while some of this is taught outright, most is learned by punishment. Speak out of turn. You might be dismissed from a meal, drop a trencher, a cuff across the head, if you're lucky. Forget to bow to a visiting abbot. The steward might reduce your bread ration for the week. Laugh during a nobleman's story. That could be the end of your position entirely. Yet, with all this pressure, there's also a strange pride in getting it right. You come to know the rhythm of the household like a musician knows a song. You sense when a noble guest is displeased before he says a word. You anticipate your mistress's requests before she voices them. You polish pewter to a shine that reflects candlelight like gold. You memorize the placement of every spoon and jug and flag on the long hall table. These small victories matter. In the rare quiet moments, maybe late at night while folding linens, or early in the morning as the world thaws under frost, you catch glimpses of something bigger, of how the entire house breathes together, how the silent labor of dozens holds up the delicate pride of one lord and his family. There are other dimensions to servant life, though things that aren't discussed, but shape you. You know who is sleeping with whom, the upstairs maid who disappears during vespers, the page who lingers too long in the chamber of the baron's widowed sister. These things are whispered in the laundry yard, hinted at in passing glances, Sometimes they are consensual, sometimes not. Servants have no real protection. If a nobleman takes interest in a scullery maid, she may become his favorite, or she may disappear. Pregnancy is a problem with only one consequence: removal. A girl who grows round is sent away. If the child is the master's, it may be passed off as a foundling or raised by another servant. But most of the time, nothing is said. The shame is hers alone. There are alliances, of course. You protect the people you trust, and they protect you. You swap chores, cover mistakes, share crusts of bread in the stairwell. You form a kind of family not of blood, but of burden. They are the only people who know what it is like to live under the constant gaze of wealth and expectation. And then there is the role of loyalty. It is expected, sometimes even demanded in public oaths. You are told to be loyal not just in action, but in thought. The noble family is above you. Yes, but they are also yours. You must defend their honor, guard their secrets, and smile even when your back aches or your mouth is dry. Some servants truly feel this loyalty, especially if they serve a kind mistress or a generous lord. A good family might provide small comforts meet on feast days, a warm cloak in winter, or kind words in front of others. But most loyalty, if we are honest, is survival. You nod, bow, and swear oaths because it's the price of a place to sleep. And then comes the church, ever present in every part of your life. Not just in the chapel you clean or the priest you serve wine to, but in the way your master reminds you that service is holy. That obedience, humility, and self-denial are the path to heaven. You are taught that your suffering is part of God's plan, and that to serve others is to serve Christ. You wonder about that sometimes, whether your sore hands and aching back are really the Lord's work, whether heaven truly cares about how well you folded your master's linen undershirt. Some servants cling to this belief, others resent it. Most simply don't have time to think deeply on it. There are rare rewards, though. On feast days, you may receive a coin. On saints' days, a better meal, sometimes even meat, spiced with cinnamon or saffron if the Lord wishes to impress guests. You might receive old clothes from the family, slightly too long in the sleeve or to find for your daily work, but warm and worth keeping. And if you serve long enough, with discipline and luck, you might rise, becoming a chamber servant or even a personal valet or lady's maid. These are the goals whispered behind kitchen doors. You may never own land. You may never speak freely. But you might, one day, carry the Lord's sword as he rides to town. You might brush the lady's hair and be trusted with her secrets. You might live in the manor all year, never again sleeping near a freezing stable. But all this takes time. Years, perhaps decades. For now, you finish scrubbing the floor in silence as the upper servants pass behind you, their shoes cleaner than your hands, and you wonder, is loyalty a virtue when it's the only choice you have? Years pass, not in leaps, but in the quiet sameness of repetition. Another fire to stoke, another bowl of broth to carry upstairs, another floor to scrub with a broom so worn you can see the handles grain. You no longer flinch at the cold in the mornings. You have grown into your role like a stone settles into the earth, gradually, without protest. If you began as a child, many did, handed off by poor parents in exchange for coin or grain. You might by now be 30. That is not young anymore, not in this line of work, not in this century. Your back does not bend as easily, and you rise slower when the bell rings, and still, there are no days off. The closest thing to rest is Sunday Mass, and even then, you walk there in livery. You stand at the back, behind the Lord and his family. You do not kneel beside them. You do not receive the same glances of respect. The village priest might nod at you, but he speaks to the household above, not the hands that polish its brass. For many servants, the only way to leave is to marry or die. If you're a woman, marriage might free you, though often to a tradesman or farmer, where labor continues in a different shape. If you're a man, perhaps you'll be dismissed with a coin and recommendation letter, seeking a new household with better rooms or kinder masters. But rarely, most do not leave. They age into their role. And aging is not kind in this world. There is no pension, no retirement. When your body slows, you are gradually reassigned to smaller tasks, watching the door, sorting firewood, mending linens. You become a shadow in the hallways. Younger servants pass you with half bows. The cook forgets your name. The Lord's son, a child you once cradled as an infant, now walks by you as if you are part of the wall. It is a quiet form of fading. Some find a second life of sorts. The best among you, those with impeccable service records, no stains of gossip, no poorly timed illnesses, might be granted a cottage on the edge of the estate, a retirement of sorts, a garden, a cow, maybe a pig if you're lucky, bread to bake on your own hearth, no bells, no orders, freedom of a kind. You might think about walking to the village market. You might even laugh at the idea of sleeping until dawn. But for many, this reward never comes. A limp, a cough, an untended tooth abscess, these can end a servant's usefulness. You may be replaced without a word, without ceremony. One day you're dismissed, and a boy with clearer eyes and stronger arms takes your place. The Lord barely notices. The other servants are careful not to look directly at you. Some give you scraps of food. A few press your hand in quiet solidarity. If you have no family, you leave with nothing. Still, you hold on to small honors. You remember the time the steward praised your stitching, the day the cook trusted you with the feast preparations, the smile you got from the visiting knight's daughter when you fixed her torn shoe ribbon. These things are yours, even if no one else remembers. Because in truth, the life of a medieval servant is defined by invisibility. You are the oil in the machine, the thing that keeps it all running. Though no one sees it glisten. And sometimes, late at night, you wonder, would the house fall without you? Maybe. After all, who would lay the rushes? Who would chase out the mice? Who would sew the buttons back on the Lord's sleeves? Or know exactly how many logs to bring in before nightfall? Then again, the world has a way of moving on. There will always be another boy, another girl, wide-eyed and hopeful, thinking perhaps they will rise through the ranks. But there is another side to this story. Some servants do rise, not often, but enough to keep the dream alive. A trusted valet might gain land and coin. A lady's maid might be wed to a clerk. And every now and then, a servant becomes indispensable, a personal confidant, a quiet power behind the scenes. These people shape history in whispers. Their names may not be remembered, but their influence echoes in decisions made by those they served. Even those who do not rise may still shape something more enduring: community, friendship, continuity. You become part of the great, nameless machinery that holds up medieval society. You are the reason the manor house functions. You are the warmth behind the fire, the hand behind the curtain, the breath that keeps the halls alive when their owners are away. And when you do finally pass from illness, injury, or simply age, your death may go unnoticed by the family upstairs, but not by the others. The cook might stop stirring her pot for a moment. The stable hand might leave a candle burning in your corner. Someone might even say your name aloud, and that is enough. Perhaps not to be great, not to be remembered in stone or song, but simply to have been needed. Still, it lingers in the quiet, this one gentle question. In a world where everything belongs to someone else, what, in the end, belongs to you? Building a mud brick house in Old Kingdom Egypt took forever.
You are standing near the edge of the Nile. Sometime around 2600 BC, it is early morning, though you wouldn't know the hour by any clock. Time here is measured by the light and the heat. And today, the light has just started to bleach the mud under your feet to a pale, chalky grey. The flood season is over. The land has receded from waterlogged to merely spongy. Now it's time to build. The village is alive with activity that isn't loud. just the scrape of reed baskets being dragged across the dirt, the thud of sandals in soft soil, a faint, rhythmic slapping sound in the distance, wet clay being shaped into bricks. You've built houses before, not temples, not tombs, nothing for kings or gods, just homes, for neighbors, for relatives, for yourself once, until it fell apart. Everything falls apart here, eventually. The Nile gives, and the Nile ruins. So the building never stops. There are no blueprints, just patterns passed through generations. How wide a house should be, how thick the walls, where to put the doorway so the wind doesn't whip the cooking fire out. You've learned these things like you learned how to walk by doing. Stumbling, correcting. Your job begins, as always, with dirt. Not any dirt. Nile mud, rich with silt, black and sticky, deposited by the gods themselves. You dig it out with flat-bladed wooden scoops, hunched over so long your back goes numb. Next to you, a boy adds straw to a wide basin and kneads it into the mud. Not just any straw-chopped, brittle barley stalks, too coarse to eat, too stiff for baskets, but perfect for brick-making. It holds the mud together when it dries. Without it, the bricks would crack, crumble, and collapse at the first sign of sun or time. You reach in and help mix the two. The sensation is familiar, gritty, cold, and heavier than it looks. You knead the mixture with both hands, as if making dough for a very bad loaf of bread. Once it's the right consistency, firm enough to hold shape, wet enough to press flat, it's time to fill the molds. They're just wood rectangles, roughly the size of a fat loaf of bread. You press the mud in with your hands, then scrape the top smooth with a flat reed or your forearm. Tap the sides, flip the mold. The brick plops out with a wet thud. Then it's laid out in the sun to dry dot. Thousands of times. It will take about a week to dry properly, longer if the weather changes. You make hundreds, but only lay bricks after they've cured. There's no mortar, no glue. Each brick is stacked with precision, then daubed with more wet clay to bind it. That's it. That's your technology. The walls grow slowly. They start low, just 2 or 3 bricks high. You walk in tight circles, stacking, smoothing, aligning. The doorframe is a scavenged wooden post, probably taken from an older home that had collapsed last spring. Wood is scarce here. It's too valuable to...
There are no windows, at least. Not in the way you'd recognize. Just narrow slits, placed high up to allow air in and give mosquitoes a harder time getting through. They're covered at night with bits of linen or reed matting, sometimes both. No glass, just wind and cloth. It lets you hear the night sounds, donkeys braying, sandals scraping past, the occasional murmur of someone walking too close and pretending not to notice the thinness of your door. The floor is still earth. You tamped it flat, then smoothed a layer of dried mud over it. It's already cracking. Sometimes people cover it with old mats to keep dust down, but they never stay clean long. Some mornings, you find a beetle under your sleeping mat, occasionally. A snake, once a scorpion. You stomped at one. Your children sleep beside you. Under a net, if you're lucky. If not, the flies nip at their eyelids and they wake up crying. You dab their bites with crushed garlic and oil. It's not medicine, but it helps. Water is kept in porous clay jars that sweat ever so slightly, cooling the contents. They're kept off the floor on little stands to discourage rats. You refill them twice a day, once at dawn, once in the late afternoon. Each trip to the river takes time and care. If you spill it on the walk back, that's your problem. No one waits for you to start again. Clothes hang from pegs on the wall, linen, mostly, but coarser than what the officials wear. You've got just enough to rotate to sets. One for work, 1 for rest days. When it rains, the wet clothes take 2 days to dry. When it's hot, they dry to fast and stiffen like bark. The home has no door in the true sense, just a linen curtain, soaked in oil and ash to discourage pests. It flaps gently in the wind, lets in shadows, and rustles ominously. When someone approaches after dark, you've learned to tell which footsteps belong to neighbors and which don't. The wall beside the doorframe is where you sometimes scratch notes, or prayer symbols, just little marks, hoping the gods of the household will notice your efforts. There is no shrine in the house, but there is a niche in the wall shaped from the same mud you built everything else, with holding a simple offering bowl. In it, a few dried figs, a pinch of incense ash, a bead someone found near the canal. Not much, just enough to say, "We are still here. Please let us stay." During the hotter months, you sleep outside, but in the cooler season, this box of mud becomes a refuge. You press your back to the inner wall and feel the day's heat slowly radiating out. It's comforting in its plainness. You have no need for beauty. You want stability. A wall that won't shift, a roof that won't drip, a corner where a child can sleep without getting stung. And yet even now you know it won't last. Rain will come. Wind will pry loose the roof. Ants will burrow into the clay. And someday, probably not that far off, you'll walk past the same house and it will be half collapsed, buried in its own dust. Someone might salvage your bricks. They'll scrape off the worn outer layer, ruin them, and press them into a new mold. In a way, you're not building your home. You're just contributing to a slow, eternal cycle of shelter. And yet, as you sit there, watching smoke drift toward the ceiling gap, you can't help but wonder, did anyone ever build a house here that truly stood the test of time? Or did it all melt back into the ground like everything else? Years have passed. Not decades, just enough time for your body to start complaining before the sun even rises. The children have grown. One is married, living in a home of his own just down the lane. The other tends animals for a wealthier family and rarely sleeps under your roof anymore. But the house still stands. Mostly. The corners have softened. The walls, once carefully pressed into tidy straight lines, now lean slightly outward. The roof sags. A deep crack splits one rear wall from top to bottom, patched several times with additional mud and straw. But still it widens after every cold night. One beam broke during a sandstorm and was replaced with a stouter piece, salvaged from a neighbor's abandoned storeroom. Nothing here stays new for long. And yet, for all its flaws, this house has lasted longer than you expected. Most do not. Just 2 houses down, a neighbor's roof collapsed when a family tried to add a second level without reinforcing the base. Too much ambition and not enough patience. They're rebuilding from the ground up now, scraping dried mud from the walls of other collapsed homes to reuse the bricks. You loan them your extra straw. They'll pay you back in dried fish. Another neighbor moved away after a small flood, hollowed out the floor beneath their sleeping area. When they pulled up the reed mats, they found the earth damp and riddled with burrowing beetles. That's not uncommon. The Nile is generous with its floods, but it never asks if you're ready. Your own floor has been redone 3 times. The last time, your son helped you tamp it down with a heavy stone roller. You sprinkled powdered lime over it this time, hoping it would help with the bugs. It did. For a while. Now it just makes the air dry and your skin itch. The most persistent threat isn't the weather. It's time. Time wears down even the best houses in Egypt. The mud loses its bond. The straw turns brittle. Small holes appear in the plaster, and when you press your thumb to them, the entire section caves and you patch. You wait, you patch again, still, you persist. There is something quietly sacred about the act of patching the same wall again and again, knowing that it will fall and that you'll rebuild it. It's not about permanence. It's about rhythm. Every wall you fix is a message to the world. We are still here. We are still worth sheltering. Some days, you dream of different houses, the ones you've seen or heard about through gossip. Limestone homes with painted walls and decorated ceilings. Homes where scribes live, priests, officials. But you also know those homes are not immune to the slow crush of dust and decay. The Nile erases even the rich, if you give it time. You've heard that tombs last longer. The Great Pyramids, they say, will stand forever. But they're not homes. No one lives there. No one cooks lentils or quiets a crying baby inside a pyramid. Those monuments are made for silence, not life. A home is different, even this humble square of clay has held laughter, arguments, sleep. It has survived marriages, illness, to floods, and a kitchen fire that scorched half the ceiling. You remember that fire well how the rush mat above the hearth caught first, sending sparks into the thatch. You beat it back with a damp tunic, shouting for your daughter to fetch water. She did. You saved the roof. But for months after, the home smelled of smoke. And even now, if the air is dry enough, you can catch that scent again in the rafters. Other memories cling, too. Scratched tally marks on the wall. From a year of poor barley harvests, a broken pot your wife refused to throw out because her mother gave it to her. The corner where your son once buried a frog in a jar, convinced it would come back to life. It didn't, but the jar is still there. You used to think of mud brick homes as temporary, as disposable, just a step above tents. But now, after years, inside one, you understand something deeper. Their strength is not in their endurance, it's in their return. You can break them, but you can also rebuild them again and again from the same earth dot. And even when the house finally falls, when the crack widens beyond repair, when the roof collapses in a final sigh of dust and timber, it will not vanish. Someone will come, maybe your grandson, maybe a stranger. They will gather what remains, what the mud, add straw, mold new bricks, press them under the same sun. The new house may not look like yours, but some part of yours will live in it. So when you press your hand to the softening wall one last time, when you feel the heat of the day rising from the brick like a final breath, you don't grieve. You smile, because you know this is how it has always been. And still, as you prepare to sleep one last night beneath this roof, you find yourself thinking, in 1,000 years, when even the memory of your name is gone, will someone dig through this ground and find the corner of your home? And if they do, will they call it civilization? Or just dust, the forgotten architects of Persepolis stand on a dry, elevated plateau in what will one day be called southwestern Iran? Though no such name exists yet. It is the 6th century before the Common Era, and the sun has not yet burned away the coolness of dawn. There is nothing yet before you but flatness, pebbled ground, hard-packed and dull, broken here and there by shrubs and the low hum of insects. And still, this is the place, this is where Darius the Great has ordered a city be born. Not a city, really. A symbol, a monument, a message carved from earth that will whisper across centuries. But before it becomes Persepolis, before the steps, the columns, the engraved stairways, it is only this: wind, dust, and a plan that no one can quite see yet. You are not Darius. You are not even among his closest builders. You are part of the silent majority, a skilled stone worker trained by your father, whose fingers now twitch in the cold mornings from years of hammering and dragging. You do not command armies, but you will shape something greater, the very bones of an empire. The first weeks involved no stone at all, just measurement, surveyors, eyes narrowed and ropes drawn taut, move with deliberate steps. They set pegs, mark corners. You hold the string, wait for the nod, then move one pace's length at a time. The site is vast, larger than any palace you have ever helped shape. One of the overseers says the main platform alone will be 125,000 square meters. You do not know what that means exactly. You only know it is big dot, and so the leveling begins. There is no machinery, only men. You dig, carry, tamp, repeat. The land must be made flat, not with precision, But with stubbornness, stone is chipped, loose soil removed. You push carts of gravel to fill dips, shovel away mounds by hand. Every swing of the tool is slow, meditative. You work beside Elamites, Medes, Babylonians. No one speaks the same language, not quite, but everyone sweats the same. When the foundation trench is finally dug, weeks later, it is deeper than your own height. Into it will go the first stones limestone quarried from nearby hills. Pulled on sledges with oiled wooden rollers, the hauling begins before the platform is even ready. Teams of 20, 30 men drag each slab down temporary roads, calling out rhythm with grunts and rope slaps. You help unload. You are careful. If one slab cracks, the work of 100 hands is lost. Once placed, the real work begins. Shaping, not carving, not yet but aligning. The base stones must fit together like teeth. This is not art. It is geometry. A single, poorly placed block will tilt the entire row. You spend days sanding one edge with crushed rock and water. Your fingers blister. Your back spasms. Still, you return the next day. The overseer comes through and places colored marks in chalk. You understand what the colors mean. Blue for finished alignment. Red for reshaping. Yellow means wait. You do not like yellow. It means someone above you is arguing. Whispers swirl that the design is being changed again. Someone in the royal court wants a new stairway. Someone else argues the walls should feature double-headed bulls. You do not care about the bulls. You only care that it means another week smoothing joints. By now, you've memorized the limestone's grain. Some slabs chip easy, others split unevenly. You can feel which side will flake just by touch. This is knowledge your tools cannot measure, but your palms know it instinctively. It is not glorious knowledge, but it is real. When the first full corner is completed, you stand back and look at it. For large stones, level, flush, dry-fitted, no cement, no plaster, just gravity and precision. It is unimpressive, but you smile anyway. Others walk past it as if it's nothing, but you know better. That square corner, half buried in dust, will someday hold up columns 20 meters high. Those columns will hold up roofs, and those roofs will shelter kings. And when people look up in awe, they will never think about this about you. The person who made sure the base was perfectly squared. You've heard that Persepolis will have multiple palaces, that it won't just be a residence, but a ritual city used for ceremonies, not daily life. Some say it will rival Babylon. Others say that's just imperial pride. Either way, you wonder, will your name survive in any of this? Probably not. Stonecutters do not get inscriptions. Architects, maybe advisors, but not laborers. You make your mark on limestone, and then someone else scrapes it smooth again. And yet you build anyway, because there is something oddly permanent about your work. These blocks will outlast your bones. Long after your children's children are gone, the stones will still sit here, locked together in silence, carrying the weight of a forgotten worker's eye for symmetry. You work beside the same men each day. You rarely talk, but you share tools. You pass jugs of water. You cough in the same dust. When one man crushes his toe under a slab, you help lift it. When another faints from heat, you wet a cloth and press it to his head. You do not know his name, but you know his rhythm. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the foundations rise. Someday, when travelers stand beneath the gate of all nations, they will marvel at the inscriptions. They will praise the carvings of lions, bulls, and the kings who demanded their shape. They will point at the heights, the stairways, the brilliance of the design. But they will not know about this early hour, this dry wind, this tiny crack in the stone that you reshape with your bare hands, until it vanished into precision. And still, you wonder as you lower yourself to rest, beneath a tarp of stitched hide. Do these foundations remember us, even when no one else does? Or are they just stone, shaped by strangers, forgotten by morning? By the time the first column is raised, the site no longer looks like a dream. Now it resembles a scar on the land. The plateau has been leveled into stark lines and terraces, its surface hardened beneath countless footfalls and tools. The air buzzes with the clamor of chisels and the rhythmic thump of stone weights as men crush lime and gravel into smooth plaster. The bones of the palace complex are beginning to show. You arrive just after dawn, your toolkit still dusty from the previous day. The column bases lie scattered across the terrace, each carved with grooves that must match the lower shafts precisely. Today, you're assigned to shaping one of those shafts, a piece of limestone nearly as tall as a man and heavier than a wagon. This is a new kind of work. Less grunt labor, more care. Your fingers must listen. You use bronze chisels sharpened on whetstones, each strike deliberate, each pass of the blade guided by callous instinct rather than blueprint. There are sketches, yes, drawn in charcoal, on strips of beaten leather or on the smooth face of unfinished stone. But those are loose suggestions. The real measurements live in muscle memory. This is where the architects begin to show their hand. Most of them are Persian, selected for loyalty, but many are foreign-born, Ionian Greeks, Babylonians, Lydians, and even a few men from Egypt who've worked on temples along the Nile. They argue often, sometimes loudly, and sometimes in 3 or 4 different tongues at once. You don't understand half of what's said, but you pick up on the tension. One architect insists on fluted columns, echoing the style of Anatolia. Another prefers smooth shafts that taper subtly toward the top, claiming they look more powerful. Someone else wants double-headed bull capitals, their horns curving outward to support wide cedar beams. Darius himself has the final word, but it seems even the King of Kings changes his mind frequently. You and the other workers don't care about capitals. You care about fit, because if the column shaft is 1 thumb's width too wide or too narrow, the capital won't rest evenly. If the stone isn't balanced perfectly, the entire upper assembly might lean or worse, fall. So, you measure, you file, you sand. And eventually, you begin raising. It takes 40 men, 6 pulleys, and an elaborate system of ramps and levers to raise each column. You watch as the first is hoisted upright, roped to a wooden scaffold like a great captive. Men shout commands in Elamite and Old Persian, and the ropes creak like boats straining at anchor. The column sways slightly, just slightly, but then settles into its socket with a solid, satisfying thud. Everyone cheers, but you're already looking at the next one. You have 30 more to go. Each day is much like the one before. Stone, sun, sweat. But with each week, something changes. The terraces grow more defined. Rooms begin to take shape, not with walls, but with rhythm. You know where the Apadana will be, the great audience hall. You know where the treasury vault will stand, although it's just a hollow pit for now. You hear rumors that a golden lion statue is being cast in Susa to guard the entrance. You'll believe it when you see it. Your favorite part, oddly enough, is the stairways. They are not grand yet, just shallow, wide steps made of flat-cut stone. But already, you can see how they slow the body's movement. They are ceremonial by nature, designed not for speed, but for display. You hear that this is intentional, that the king wants foreign envoys to ascend slowly, forced to take in the full scope of Persian power with every deliberate step. You carve 1 tread at a time. Each step must be identical. If one is even slightly uneven, it must be pulled out and redone. You've redone the same step 3 times. You do not complain. There is no faster way to achieve eternity than through repetition. Around you, life hums with the quiet bureaucracy of empire. Scribes tally deliveries of stone. Record keepers document which workers receive bread, beer, and oil each day. Everyone gets paid, even you. The receipts are pressed into clay and baked in the sun. Years from now, when these tablets are dug up, people will read your name, but they won't know your face. They'll know you only as a number, a laborer, a line item in a budget for glory. Still, it's something. One evening, as the sun falls, behind the hills, you sit beside a small fire with 3 others. One man speaks of his brother, conscripted into the army. Another shares dry dates brought from his village near the Tigris. You choose slowly, staring at the silhouette of the half-built columns, rising against the fading sky. What do you think it will look like when it's done? Someone asks. You shrug. You won't see it. None of you will. That's the unspoken truth. A complex like this palaces, halls, walls, towers will take decades, maybe lifetimes. You'll spend your entire youth shaping stone that you'll never walk under. And yet, it's not discouraging, because in a way, it means this city is already eternal. It is not defined by being finished. It is defined by being built. Some nights you lie on your mat and imagine a world where the columns shine with polished plaster, where dignitaries from faraway lands climb your stairways, their footsteps echoing through the courtyards. You imagine the murals already being planned depicting lions, lotus flowers, rows of attendants bringing tribute from every corner of the empire. You wonder who will paint them, who will choose the pigments, who will decide what story the stone tells. And then, because it is late and your muscles ache, you roll over and ask yourself one last thing before sleep. When Persepolis is finally finished, will anyone remember how hard it was just to raise the first stone? Or will they only praise the kings who walked above them? Years have passed since the first stone was laid on the bare, windswept plateau. The limestone dust still clings to everything: your clothes, your hair, even the creases in your skin. Your fingers are not as steady as they once were. But you are still here, still walking the terraces of Persepolis. The city has grown taller than you imagined. You stand in the shadow of the Apidanus columns. They are finished now, fluted shafts rising over 20 meters high, each crowned with a bull or lion capital. Their symmetry so precise they almost feel weightless. But they are not. You know their true mass. You know the effort it took to lift each one, inch by inch, with nothing more than pulleys, ramps. An aching human will die. You are no longer a common laborer. Time and an eye for detail have earned you a place among the master stone setters. You do less hauling, more checking. You inspect joints. You trace your finger along the seams between stones, feeling for errors invisible to the eye. And sometimes when no one is watching, you run your palm along the cold, smooth surface of a finished wall, just to remember that you helped it stand. The murals are nearly done. Artisans, some from Lydia, others from Egypt, have painted bright panels in ochre, cobalt, and a deep red that looks like dried blood. Reliefs now adorn the grand stairways. You pause to examine them sometimes. Rows of tribute bearers carved in low relief, their clothes etched in delicate detail. They carry gold bowls, ivory tusks, bolts of embroidered cloth. Each figure represents a subject nation: Elamites, Bactrians, Scythians, Ethiopians, Medians, all carved to seem orderly and obedient. You know it's a story, carefully crafted. Real life is messier. You've seen Persians and Medes bicker over materials. You've seen accidents, injuries, thefts. You've seen workers vanish in the night or collapse from the sun. But none of that appears in the carvings. In stone, everything is harmonious. You begin to notice how this place, this city you helped raise, is a performance, not just of power, but of perfection. It is an illusion built from thousands of imperfect hands like yours. Some days, you visit the treasury, not the vulture. Not allowed in there, but the walls outside, where workers like you once pressed their pay tablets into clay. You find your name again. It's still there, recorded as having received rations, barley, dates, oil for 2 months during the 5th year of Darius's reign. You trace it gently. The mark is not elaborate, just a wedge of script and Elamite. But it's yours. By now, Xerxes rules in Darius's place. There is talk of war with the Greeks. Rumors drift through the work site like dust. Some say the Athenians have burned a temple in Sardis. Others whisper that Persian ships will soon cross the sea to take revenge. You try not to think of war. War is for generals. You have only ever built things meant to last. And yet, you worry. One morning, A minor noble arrives to tour the site. He asks one of the foremen who designed the layout of the treasury entrance. The foreman gestures toward one of your old colleagues, an Assyrian, sharp-eyed, now stooped with age. But the noble frowns and waves him away. He wants to hear about the king's vision, not the builder's. That night, over a cold meal of lentils and onion, you say little. The fire burns low. Others joke, sing softly. You stare into the flickering light and ask yourself, not for the first time, what is this place really for? It is not a capital in the ordinary sense. The king will not live here year-round. The halls are too ceremonial, the stairways too theatrical. It is a crown but worn only on holidays. The real governance will happen elsewhere, in Susa, Ecbatana, Babylon. Persepolis is not for function. It is for memory. But whose memory? Yours. You are not so sure. Years later, when the final beams are laid in the hall of 100 columns, when the stone roads are smooth, when the gates gleam with bronze and the city opens its arms to guests of the empire, you are no longer able to work. Your legs ache, your eyesight dims. You sit in the shade of a pillar you once helped lift and listen to the pigeons coo in its shadow. You think of the men who are no longer here, the ones who died building the walls, the ones who were forgotten the moment their task ended, the ones whose names never even made it onto the ration lists. And you wonder, what happens when no one remembers the builders, when the kings die, when the scribes vanish, when the stones themselves fall? To generations after your death, Alexander the Great will ride into Persepolis. He will admire its grandeur, and then he will burn it. The reasons will be debated for centuries. Revenge, politics, drunken impulse. But the flames will rise just the same. The cedar roofs will collapse. The murals will blister. The columns will crack in the heat, toppling onto the same stones you once polished with your own hands. And still some parts will endure. Centuries later, travelers will stumble upon broken capitals lying in the dirt. Archaeologists will dig up your ration tablet. They will find the seams of stone joints so precisely cut that modern engineers will pause in admiration. They will marvel not just at what was built, but at how it was possible with no machines, no cement, no written blueprints. And perhaps, just perhaps, they will say, this was built not only by kings, but by thousands of hands no one remembers. Ordinary hands, forgotten architects of a city meant to be eternal, even in ruin. Persepolis will speak, and the question will linger like heat over ancient stone. Was that your voice echoing through time, or just the quiet breath of the stone itself? How Roman aqueducts were actually maintained? You are an Aquarius, a maintenance worker in the Roman water system. And somewhere deep in the tunnels beneath the city, a channel is clogged or cracked again. You were trained not with scrolls but with lime plaster, chisels, and a familiarity with darkness. You have memorized every bend in the Aqua Marcia, every shaft of light that sneaks through the speakest the main channel. Where the water flows, you know how long it takes to crawl through the narrow access points with your tools. You know the exact stench of standing water that's been trapped too long in the curves of an inverted siphon. Your day begins like most, hunched, cold, and silent. You eat only a little. Bread soaked in watered wine, a few olives, maybe a fig. If you're lucky, salt on your tongue. You tighten your leather apron, wrap your hands in linen strips to ward off the lime burns, and light the oil lamp. The flame flickers, the tunnel yawns open, and you begin your descent into one of the most overlooked wonders of the ancient world. The bowels of Rome dot above you. The city is waking up. Bakers knead dough. Senators argue politics. Slaves hull chamber pots. But down here, in the long stone arteries of empire, you walk alone with the water. The aqueducts feed over a dozen major distribution points across Rome: cisterns, fountains, baths, and private homes. But water doesn't move itself. It must be directed, balanced, coaxed, and most importantly, it must be kept clean. That is your job. The tunnel you enter today is part of the Aqua Claudia. one of the grandest aqueducts in Rome. It was finished only a few decades ago under Emperor Claudius after decades of construction, and it brings water from the Anio Novus, some 40 miles outside the city. Though it looks grand from the outside, those massive stone arches you see cutting across the countryside, in truth, most of it is hidden. The water flows silently in enclosed channels underground, sealed in concrete and brick, tilting ever so slightly downward. A perfect slope, about 1 part vertical to 200 parts horizontal to steep, and the water rushes to fast, to flat, and at stagnates dot inside. It's not romantic. The channels are slimy. Sediment builds up constantly, calcium deposits from the hard water that flows from the springs. You carry a scaler, a flat chisel used to scrape off the limestone crust that lines the walls like growing tree bark. Sometimes you find the tunnel nearly closed off by it, just a trickle making it through. Other times, the damage is more serious. Cracks in the mortar, a broken tile, even an entire wall collapsed from pressure. There is no glory here, only wet hands, silent effort, and the faint hope you'll finish before your oil lamp burns out. You work with a small crew, usually no more than 4 or 5 men. Some are enslaved. Others, like you, are free but poor. A few are Greek-speaking engineers sent by the provincial governors to inspect imperial property. You rarely speak while inside. Words echo too easily in the confined stone. Too much noise and you'll miss the sound of trouble. A slow drip, the gurgle of backflow, the hissing pressure of a crack under strain. Today, the trouble is a blockage, and a secondary branch, a diverted pipe leading toward the baths of Agrippa. Someone up above, probably a landowner bribing a water inspector, has siphoned off more than their share. You see the signs. The lead piping, stamped with a private name, has been illegally inserted into the channel. It leaks. It throws off the pressure. You note it, scrape around it, and make a mental decision. You'll report it. But quietly. Too much fuss, and the landowner might pay the overseer to look the other way. Or worse, blame you for the damage. You think of water not as a liquid, but as a living thing. It moves with purpose, resists disruption, and demands respect. Roman engineers understood this. They built settling tanks into the system, broad, open chambers where sediment could settle before the water continued into the city. You stop it. One now. It's dark, waist deep in murky sludge. You and another worker take turns scooping the muck into baskets, hauling it up via rope pulley to the surface. It reeks, but it must be cleared, or else the aqueduct will foul and the baths will run brown. Sometimes your work overlaps with the curator's aquarium, the elite overseers appointed by the emperor himself. These men rarely enter the tunnels, of course. They deal in scrolls, budgets, and inspections. But occasionally, they tour a site. You once saw one in fine sandals wrinkle his nose at the smell and ask, "Do you really need to go in there?" Before being handed a chisel and lamp just for demonstration. He didn't come back. Breaks are rare. You eat underground if you must. Your lamp flickers constantly, casting shadows that trick your eyes into seeing cracks where there are none. Sometimes, you pass through air shafts, narrow vertical wells that ventilate the tunnels. The sun pours in for just a moment like a divine hand from Jupiter himself, and you stretch your back for a few seconds in the shaft of warmth, before ducking back into the cool dark dot. And then there's the danger, not from collapse. The Roman concretopus camentitium is remarkably strong. No, the danger is from gas, occasionally. Gases build up in sealed chambers, carbon dioxide, rotting vegetation, even sulfuric fumes from algae. You carry a clay oil lamp not just for light, but because if it sputters out, it warns you first. There are stories, true ones, of workers passing out mid-crawl and never coming back. One of your crew carries a dog for this reason, small and weary, trained to whine when the air sours. It's crude, but it works. At the end of your shift, the tunnel is clean. The blockage is cleared. The illegal pipe is marked. The water flows again, and no one above notices. The The fountains continue to trickle. The baths remain hot. The emperor's garden is irrigated without interruption. All because of you. And yet, your name will never be carved into stone. No statue will remember your work. You are a shadow in a channel, a silhouette in a forgotten corner of empire. But you do not need fame. You only want to sleep without the drip of a leak echoing in your skull. Tomorrow, you'll descend again. Another tunnel, another leak, another silent victory for gravity, cleanliness, and the unseen hands that keep the greatest city on earth from falling apart one trickle at a time. And as you lie down to sleep tonight, limbs aching and clothes still damp from underground work, you wonder, if Rome's glory flows from its water, why are the people who keep it flowing always left behind? When dawn breaks the next day, the water is still running, but your day is far from routine. You're summoned to the Castellum Divisorium, the central distribution tank atop one of Rome's 7 hills. Few ever see it up close from this nondescript stone building. The entire Roman water supply is divided into an intricate web of channels, pipes, and basins. Some of it flows freely to public fountains and baths. Some is directed to the private homes of the elite, those who've paid, bribed, or simply inherited their way into a personal water supply. The rest, it tends to disappear quietly, without record. You are not there to admire the engineering. You are there to help inspect a suspected theft. The problem isn't new. Water theft in Rome is as old as the aqueducts themselves. Officially, every pipe is supposed to be registered and stamped, usually with the name of the owner and the emperor's insignia. But even in a world of scrolls and statutes, enforcement is another story. Lead is soft, easy to melt and reshape, and the temptation is enormous in a city where water flows from hill to hill without effort. All it takes is a quiet night, a few tools, and one unscrupulous overseer for an entire bathhouse to siphon off free water. You climb to the roof of the Castellum and look out across the city. To the east, the domes of bathhouses gleam. To the west, the rooftops of Rome's poorer districts are flat and dry. You know, without being told, that most illegal taps are not in the tenements, they are in the villas. The law turns its eye away from the rich inside the Castellum. You find 3 main outlets flowing at unequal pressure. You and a junior engineer run a dye test, dropping a bit of saffron-tinted liquid into one tank and watching it move. The dye is supposed to emerge at only 1 fountain. Instead, it emerges at 3, including a private cistern behind the senator's estate, a name you know well. He'll be fined eventually, but the paperwork must go through a dozen offices. More likely, someone will get paid to misplace it. You move on. Your next assignment takes you outside the city, to the campaign of the rural plains that feed Rome its water. The aqueducts begin not in the city, but far beyond it, in the Anio Valley and surrounding hills. Here, natural springs are captured, filtered through settling tanks, and sent on their long journey downhill. It is in these remote places that the aqueducts are most vulnerable, not to where but to ignorance. The locals don't always appreciate the aqueduct. They see it as imperial infrastructure, not their own. Farmers sometimes damage channels accidentally, digging near underground conduits or draining small side channels into fields. Others do it intentionally, hoping to irrigate dry patches of land. Some even believe the aqueducts curse the soil, that the water, forced from its natural path, brings bad fortune. In one village, you are called to inspect a segment of the Aqua Tepula, where water has slowed to a trickle. You find the channel clogged with roots, fig trees planted too close, their greedy limbs breaching the mortar. Worse, someone has carved a side notch into the wall and plugged it with a wooden stopper. You remove it gently. The water resumes. You do not report the villagers. You understand. You are not just a technician. You are part of a massive, largely invisible network of maintenance stretching across the empire. You and your peers are not given medals, but the system cannot function without you. Rome's aqueducts stretch for hundreds of miles, some like the Aqua Virgo, still feed water after centuries of use. Others, like the Aqua Triana, bring water from distant lakes through painstakingly carved tunnels beneath hillsides. The challenge is not just maintenance. It is memory. You carry in your head a living map of the system, its high points and low, its valves and pressure shafts. No single scroll records it all, even the Frontinus Codex, the great treatise written by Rome's water commissioner Sextus Julius Frontinus, is incomplete. He tried to list every aqueduct, every pipe, every misuse. He railed against corruption, theft, laziness. But even he admitted, water is more easily taken than guarded. Frontinus understood your world. He walked the tunnels. He saw the politics. He knew that the aqueduct was not just engineering, it was empire, a symbol of control over nature, of Roman order imposed upon wildness, of a city so mighty it could drink from distant hills without moving a stone. But he also knew this: all that grandeur rested on the shoulders of workers like you. Late in the afternoon, you enter a cloaca, one of the great sewers of Rome, not technically part of the aqueduct system, but related. The same water that runs to baths and fountains must eventually drain in. Here it does. You walk through the Cloaca Maxima, the oldest sewer in Rome, still functioning after 500 years. The water is darker now, filled with runoff, waste, silt. It smells of empire. You inspect a junction where a bathhouse drains. You note erosion in the channel, lime leaching from the stone. You suggest a patch of pozzolanic mortar, the same volcanic mixture that keeps harbor walls intact. It will last another century. Your notes are taken by a young scribe. He yawns. He does not understand the importance, but you do. You end your day at a public fountain, a marble nymphaeum carved with sea gods and tritons. People gather here, children, merchants, old women with clay jugs. They fill their vessels, splash their faces, chat. No one thanks the aqueduct. No one thinks of the workers beneath the street. But the water is clear. The pressure is steady. The system holds. And that, to you, is enough still. As you lean against the wall and watch the water spill endlessly from a lion's mouth, you wonder, how long will Rome remember its water once it stops flowing? You return years later not as a worker, but as a man grown older, no longer strong enough to scale ladders or drag yourself through shoulder-high channels. You now carry scrolls instead of chisels and wear sandals made for walking upright, not crawling on stone. Still, the smell of damp earth and fresh flowing water never leaves your nose. The rhythm of drip, flow, and silence still echoes in your sleep. But something has changed in Rome. It is quieter. There are still fountains, still baths, still senators who bribe their way to private pipes. But the imperial order that once enforced the balance of water and city has begun to unravel. Some aqueducts still function, of course. The Aqua Virgo remains flowing into the campus marshes, thanks to its relative proximity and shallow route. But others, the Grand Aqua Claudia, the proud Aqua Marcia, have begun to break, and no one is repairing them. When you visit a distribution tank once overseen by engineers and inspectors, you find only silence. The stairs are crumbling. The lead pipes have been pried away not by saboteurs, but by desperate citizens, melting the metal down to forge utensils, weights, even crude arrowheads. Lead poisoning, you now realize, was never the main threat. The danger was forgetting how the system worked. Rome had grown so used to its water running on time, so reliant on unseen labor, that when chaos came, when roads were unsafe, when taxes failed, when emperors fell too quickly to be remembered, no one remembered how to keep the water moving. The curators aquarium, once appointed by the emperor himself, have vanished. The equerry, once a brotherhood of trained men who passed down secrets of lime mixing and tunnel resonance, are gone or scattered. You hear rumors that some found work in Constantinople, where aqueducts still flow under the Eastern emperors. Others went back to their villages, where no one believed their stories of walking inside rivers. You remain, wandering Rome like a ghost of the system you once served. It is the 5th century now, and you walk the Aqua Triana route west of the city. It still brings water from Lake Bracciano, though not in the quantities it once did. The concrete is cracked in places, roots pry between bricks, the tilting arches still rise tall, but moss has overtaken the joints. Nature is reclaiming what was once subdued. You meet a boy there, local, maybe 10 years old. He's poking at the trickle of water with a stick. You ask him if he knows what this is. He shrugs. An old wall. He says, it rains from it. He doesn't know. No one told him. You sit with him for a while and draw in the dirt, the channel, the settling tanks, the drop shafts. You show him how the water once flowed like blood through a body, and how the city once drank from mountains. You tell him that Rome didn't just build temples and armies. It built gravity into architecture. It domesticated rivers. It commanded silence in stone, and water obeyed. He nods, not understanding, but he listens. It may be enough. Years later still, you hear a monk at a rural monastery speaking of ancient Roman miracles that brought water from hills. They use a collapsed aqueduct channel to irrigate their crops now. They do not know who built it. They call it the path of the river angels. You do not correct them, because in a way, they're right. The real miracle wasn't in how the aqueducts were designed. The miracle was how long they were maintained, not by gods or emperors, but by thousands of anonymous workers like yourself, crawling through stone in silence, chipping lime with numb fingers, watching flame for warnings of bad air. A miracle held together with mortar, patience, and labor so constant it became invisible eventually. Even you fade from the city, but the water leaves last. It keeps trickling for generations, first as a rush, then a flow, then a whisper, and finally, nothing but the memory of wet stone. By the time the medieval city rises atop the ruins, few remember the full path of any aqueduct. Their roots are buried beneath newer streets, churches, and gardens. Some are reused as sewers, others become burial crypts. One becomes a wine cellar. It will not be until centuries later that scholars and engineers, with shovels and guesses, begin to rediscover the genius of Rome's water. They will marvel at the resilience of Opus Caementicum, still holding together. Without rebar, they will trace the gradients with surveying tools and wonder how men without compasses made such perfect slopes. They will write books, give lectures, place plaques on the surviving arches. But your name, like the names of your crew, will not be among them. Because to Rome, water never had a beginning. It simply was. And yet now, in this quiet ruin of a once living system, you leave behind a question. As you walk away one final time, what happens to a civilization not when its monuments fall, but when its water forgets where to flow? How ancient Persians beat the heat without air conditioning. You wake up in the high desert of ancient Persia, somewhere near the city of Yazd, where the air is dry, the sun is relentless, and the earth bakes from dawn until dusk. The year is difficult to place, somewhere in the Achaemenid period, perhaps the reign of Darius I. Though not much has changed for centuries before or after, you are not a noble, not a soldier, not a priest. You are a city dweller, living in a modest mud brick home on the edge of the desert. And your main concern today, like every day, is simple. How do you stay cool in this heat? There are no fans, no buttons to press, no ice, unless you're rich enough to have it hauled from distant mountains. But there is something else, something deceptively clever. The badger, the windcatcher. Your home, like many others in this region, has one. From the street, it looks like a tower tall, slender, pierced with wooden slats and vertical slits. But this is no minaret or watchtower. It is a machine, a silent, ancient device that captures wind and delivers it indoors without moving parts, without fire or fuel. It is shaped by centuries of trial, error, and refinement. It is your air conditioner made of earth and air alone. You sit beneath the windcatcher in early morning, when the breeze is gentle. The interior of the shaft is lined with smooth plaster, designed to coax even the slightest movement of air downward. The tower has multiple openings, and whichever side the wind favors is the one that feeds the interior. The air is drawn down through narrow channels and into the basement room, known as the Shabastan, a cool chamber half buried in the earth. This room is more than just shaded. It's connected to something even more critical, the cannon. The cannon is perhaps the greatest Persian innovation you've never seen. It's an underground canal, a slope tunnel carved gently from mountain aquifers to cities and fields below. The system relies purely on gravity, moving water through cool, dark channels beneath the surface. These tunnels can stretch for miles, sometimes requiring hundreds of vertical shafts for maintenance and airflow. Entire towns depend on them. Your Shabastan sits just above one of these cannons. Air is drawn down by the windcatcher, flows across the moving, cold groundwater, and rises into the living quarters, bringing with it not only coolness but moisture. A rare and precious thing in this arid place. It isn't a gust. It isn't loud, but it works. This is what keeps bread from spoiling by midday. What allows you to sleep through the searing afternoon, and what has made cities like Yez habitable for thousands of years. Outside, the streets are deserted. It is mid-morning now, and the heat has begun to settle in. The markets open early and close early. The walls of the city are made from kesh, sun-dried mud bricks that insulate surprisingly well. Alleyways are narrow not just to maximize land, but to minimize sunlight. Every decision seems to bend around the heat, to use it, to avoid it, to live with it. You pass an old merchant's house with a double windcatcher, one tower taller than the other. This is no accident. The difference in height creates a natural pressure gradient, forcing hot air out through the taller shaft while pulling cool air down the other. It's a passive system, and it requires no tuning. Yet it's not perfect. Windcatchers must be cleaned, patched, and adjusted with the seasons. In winter, they are often blocked with cloth or stone to keep warm air from escaping. You remember a neighbor once forgot to do this and spent an entire winter shivering. Undergoat hair blankets dot the cannons, too, require labor. Teams of Moganis, expert diggers, descend into vertical shafts to clear silt, reinforce walls, and check for leaks. It's dangerous work. A misstep, a collapse, or even a rush of water can kill. But without their work, the city dries. So every year, when the sun softens in early spring, the Moganis descend. You once helped them. Just once. You remember the silence, the echo of your sandals in a tunnel barely shoulder wide, the feel of cool mist rising from the stream. The air down there is alive, damp, mineral-rich. Ancient, some cannons are so old that no one remembers who dug them. Their origins are mythical, attributed to kings, demons, or the first great cities. But they work, and so they remain. You return to your home at midday and rest in the Shabastan. You eat dry dates, cold flat bread, a few almonds. Outside, the sun blazes. But in here, beneath the earth, with the whisper of air gliding past your ear, you are cool. There are no ice chests, no switches, no copper coils, only wind and shadow, and water moving silently beneath your feet. And as you drift off to a half-sleep in the dim stone room, one thought lingers. What other ancient cities learned to listen so closely to the wind? You rise early the next morning, not because of an alarm, but because the dawn is the only bearable time to move through the streets of Yazd. The city is not sprawling like Babylon or towering like Persepolis. It's humble, made from the same desert that threatens it, but every corner, every lane, every surface seems shaped with heat in mind. You step outside and are immediately wrapped in quiet. The streets are narrow and winding, and that's not by accident. These weren't built for parades or chariots, but for air control. The tall, plain walls of the mud brick houses block the sun for most of the day. In fact, Many streets are so tight that daylight never touches the ground, only a glowing band. On the upper walls, as the sun shifts, shade is the first form of survival. Even the rooftops are built with care. Most are flat and whitewashed, ideal for sleeping during the hottest nights of summer. And when the air feels completely still, you notice something almost magical: air still moves. That's because the design of the entire neighborhood guides it like invisible rivers, flowing through homes, alleys, and courtyards. The city feels carved into the wind, not merely built. You pass a public cistern, known locally as an DBM bar. It sits quietly near a mosque, its dome like a half-submerged shell, painted with lime to reflect the sun. It doesn't look like much, but below the surface lies an immense water chamber, designed to remain cold for months. How? The DBM bar uses both depth and insulation. The dome above is often surrounded by wind catchers, tall chimneys that dry air downward. The chamber itself is buried deep in the ground and lined with srouge, a waterproof mortar of clay, egg whites, lime, and ash. You once helped haul srouge during your younger years. Its smell still lingers in your mind. Acrid and earthy. Applied correctly, it can hold water for decades without decay. Some cisterns are even cooled with ice harvested in winter from nearby mountains or yakhals, ancient Persian ice pits. These cone-shaped domes look like primitive observatories, but inside is a deep storage chamber where ice is preserved through insulation and evaporation. The ice is used sparingly, mainly by the wealthy, but its very existence in the desert shows just how far ingenuity can stretch. You stop by a friend's home near the bazaar, where the passageways seem even darker. Some of these alleys are partially vaulted, forming half-covered tunnels that shield the market stalls from heat. The layout of the bazaar itself is strategic, not just for trade, but for climate. The stalls are grouped in tight rows. The ceilings are high and dotted with oculi, small circular openings that draw warm air upward. You've stood beneath them before and felt the subtle pull of rising heat, even with no wind. Merchants joke that the air inside the bazaar is smarter than they are, and in a way, they're right. These designs are not new. They are refinements of older principles, passed down, adjusted, adapted. Some date back to the Elamites or even earlier. The knowledge is not secret, but local and lived, baked into the habits of masons and passed between generations, not by books, but by hands and memory. Later, you visit a caravanserai or roadside inn for travelers and traders. These structures must manage heat and people. The central courtyard is open to the sky, but surrounded by shaded arcades. Rooms are placed around the inner edge, and the thick walls trap the cool of night. You once stayed in one during a long trip and noticed how the sleeping chambers were always built on the northern side. A small detail, but one that meant cooler nights and easier dreams. Even the clothing here is a form of adaptation. You wear a loose cotton robe, light in color and long in cut. It protects your skin while allowing air to circulate. The women wear similar fabrics, though often layered more tightly for modesty. The point is not fashion, it's comfort and conservation. Every layer serves the heat. And what of noise? There isn't much. These cities are quiet by design. No metal clanging, no horses galloping through the streets. Sound, like light and wind, is managed. Courtyards serve as buffers. Plaster walls absorb echoes. Many rooms face inward, where conversation can remain private and where the murmur of fountains becomes a cooling presence in both mind and body. These courtyards are not just places to rest. They are part of the thermal system. A small pull-off called a house sits at the center. On a hot day, you'll see it used for washing, for prayer, for watching the sky reflected in still water. And when the wind moves across it, the temperature drops slightly. Not drastically, but noticeably. Enough to make life more bearable. You reflect on all this as you return to your home and recline beneath your own windcatcher once. Again, the day has grown hotter now, but inside, it is tolerable. You eat dried figs and cheese. You sip water brought up from the cannon, and you lie still, listening not just for air but for a kind of ancient logic, embedded in clay and shaped by sun. Persian engineers knew what the modern world has begun to forget, that buildings are not machines to be cooled, but environments to be shaped. They didn't fight the heat, they designed with it. But still, despite the genius around you, one question continues to stir in your mind. As the windcatcher hums overhead, what happens when the knowledge that made this all possible disappears into silence? It is centuries later, but the bones of Yaz remain the same. A child climbs the narrow steps of a windcatcher to help her grandfather repair a cracked slat. The air is still dry, still warm, and the cannon still murmurs underground, flowing quietly beneath the city like an artery of time. You sit in the same room you did before, but now the whispers of modernity creep in. Somewhere, someone has brought a noisy diesel generator. It hums faintly in the background, a sound your ancestors would not have known. But the windcatcher still works. The air still flows. A breeze still touches your skin, drawn down by gravity, difference, and ancient wisdom. You begin to see something clearly. These weren't just engineering marvels. They were philosophies of living. The ancient Persians did not conquer nature. They collaborated with it. They did not build against the sun. They built with its rhythms. They did not see wind, water, and earth as enemies to overcome, but forces to listen to. In your hands, you hold a scrap of parchment, an old sketch of a city plan. It's dated to the Sasanian era, and it shows the deliberate placement of cannons, reservoirs, windcatchers, and alleys. The entire design is a thermal map hundreds of years before thermodynamics became a science. There were no calculators, no sensors, no computer models, only stone, wind, clay, and patience. But then something began to change. By the 20th century, the windcatchers, once a defining feature of Persian cities, began to vanish. New buildings favored steel and glass, materials that looked modern but trapped heat rather than repelled it. The cannons, so delicately carved and maintained for millennia, began to collapse as electric pumps replaced gravity-fed systems. Groundwater levels dropped. Traditional knowledge, once passed by masons, engineers, and farmers, began to fade from living memory. Some cities sealed their windcatchers shut. Others tore them down entirely, considering them relics of poverty. A young generation grew up without ever knowing how the cool air once circled a room, without a single moving part. The desert, once respected and studied, became something to be shut out instead of worked with. And yet not everything is lost. In recent decades, architects and engineers from around the world have turned their attention back to these ancient technologies. A university in Tehran began cataloging intact cannons, sending teams of students to document and study their remaining roots. Yaz was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, not for its grandeur, but for its climate-sensitive design. Its shaded alleys, its earth-toned buildings, its enduring windcatchers. Modern green architects now speak of passive cooling, thermal mass, and natural ventilation. But these ideas are not new. They are old, very old, and the Persians have been doing it for thousands of years. In fact, some of the most energy-efficient buildings today mimic ancient Persian designs. They incorporate modern wind catchers, buried water pipes, and thick, breathable walls made from local materials. In a way, the desert has come full circle, and yet there is still more to remember. You think of the unnamed laborers who dug the cannons by hand, who shaped the mud bricks under the hammering sun, of the children who slept on rooftops during summer nights, listening to wind rustling and plaster channels, of the women who cleaned the Shabastand floors, careful not to spill precious water. These were not engineers, but survivors. Their lives were simple, but their world was complex and perfectly tuned. Perhaps the greatest legacy of these ancient systems is not the structures themselves, but the mindset behind them. That survival in extreme climates does not require domination, but harmony. That boring solution slow, quiet, invisible ones may be more enduring than the flash of invention, and that the future of architecture may be buried not in new blueprints, but in old dust. As the sun begins to dip low, you walk once more through the shaded alleys of Yazd. The wind catchers rise like silent sentinels, mouths open to the sky. The city exhales gently, and you wonder softly, quietly, perhaps even sleepily, what else have we forgotten that once made life not just possible, but peaceful?